could spend a lot of time moaning and groaning and payers and Medicare and pain in the neck patients and all that stuff, and the staff's no good and I can't, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they're still doing some pretty remarkable things, but it still can be a lot better. And if we're constantly chasing that, making it a lot better one at a time, I mean, that's it's a pretty remarkable thing. So that I kind of carry that around with me. That's kind of my favorite little vignette and inspiration for me that keeps me going all these years.
Wow.
Nothing in this podcast is intended to render legal, financial, medical, or other professional information. Because the details of your situation are fact-dependent, we highly encourage you to find a recommended individual that you can trust to give you the expertise that you need related to your situation.
We have another special guest, but this guy is so unique in the marketplace. We're interviewing and talking to Mike Murphy. He's the managing partner at Sunstone Management Advisors. And we'll put the links and contact information in his bio in the show notes below or above. But today we're going to talk about a lot of different things. So jumping from lily pad to lily pad, we're going to talk about some, transforming, revitalizing, and building healthcare and insurance companies through transformative leadership and operational efficiency. How do you what are some of the business fundamentals for your practice that you can do? He's had background in payer and provider relationships, contracting, kind of best practice. You're like a jack of all trades. You're the handyman of healthcare. Is probably not a great metaphor, but I'll let you describe your background.
Yes, yeah, because the other side of it, the glass half full of poison is I just can't hold a job, so I constantly do all these different things, right? But actually, it was advice I got early. A career Sherpa said that when I was a very very young man starting out in the world, and he just said constantly do lots of different things. Don't travel the road, often travel, take left-hand turns and then, the Taken series, Brian Mills, I have a unique set of skills. I've touched a lot of different things, and I've always considered myself a student of the business. So a quick, 30-second flyby. I'm going on 40 years experience. Started my journey inside the big payers. I was a Cigna alum, born and bred. It was a great place to grow up and learn the business. And then woke up one day and realized that having a bigger job inside the larger organization wasn't having a better job in terms of my fit. And then the second joke is I don't breed in captivity. So I really wanted to go out and do some more kind of entrepreneurial things, and did a series of entrepreneurial things, which is changey, fixy startup inside mid-sized or large organizations. And that was just okay. So be very wary of organizations saying a desire to see change. Most of them, particularly established ones, want a different, ultimate definition of madness, want something different, but don't want to do anything different to get there. And then my last back half of my career has been more entrepreneurial, small to mid-sized businesses. And then over the last couple of years, as somebody said, let's pool our resources and let's figure out a way to help as many companies as we can as possible. So we kind of reformatted it and relaunched Sunstone Management Advisors. Our business model is basically we help companies get better. And so we are singularly devoted to helping companies improve their operations, either growth strategies, product, sales execution, client management, client retention, finding margins. A lot of, especially in the healthcare space, but providers as well, they don't necessarily understand where they're making money, where they're not making money. Strategy, which, do you have the right strategy? And then fractional leadership, just another set of arms and legs. So, our tagline is go beyond, which we love to work with entrepreneurs and companies that want to make their business better. And we figure out a way and engage to make all the economics work. So we're, been in the healthcare space now for a while. I'm passionate about it. I'm excited about how it's great opportunity and it's great potential and it's all the wonderful things it does, but I'm also struck by how much better it can be. And that's been, a mission of mine for quite some time now. So thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to talk to you and your audience. I love the profile. I love the folks you're going after. The physicians have an advantage. I can never be a clinician, but a clinician can be a business person. And so I'm happy to help in that journey any way I can.
I do. I love talking about, entrepreneurial topics, especially as it relates to a, physician's office and equipping them to be informed to make better decisions. And that's what we try to do. So, if we back up a little bit and we look at, 50,000 foot perspective of the last, I've been in healthcare, writing about it, working for different organizations over the last 20 something years. And it seems as though I've recognized I'm not idealistic anymore about I'm going to go out there and change the world, right? It's like you get older and you get more experienced and wiser. And, I think Steve Jobs was so right when he said, make a dent in the universe. Um, and I think that we're all making dents in the universe. Doctors play a significant role in so many people's lives. But looking in backwards for a moment so that we can learn from the mistakes and the hassles and the challenges and the good things that came out of the last 20 to 40 years in your perspective, because you've worked with the payers, you worked created networks. What have you learned during that time that maybe uh, inspired you to be where you are today, but also here's where I think we're heading in healthcare?
Yeah. So, a couple things there. Well, one is I'm encouraged by, particularly over the last 5 to 10 years worth of development. On the one hand, so you have these large competing forces. So the first thing is that there is a consolidation, right? You have the payer community, Blues United, Cigna, Aetna, massive consolidation, dominant market share, gigantic organizations, not exactly the most nimble or customer friendly or market responsive. And the same token, the same thing going on the kind of the healthcare institutional provider side, massive consolidation. So those two things don't necessarily um, create the environment where you might see a lot of innovation. But there are a lot of things that are happening underneath the surface that are encouraging to me. Certainly, the amount of research and development and advancements that are taking place on the science side of healthcare and figuring out ways to make people's lives better. And then the similar side of it is kind of the data things that are taking place about how can we improve the lives of the people that are in the healthcare system. The challenge is there's a lot of change and you have a complicated ecosystem. And so how do you navigate that? So I would say that as I think about where we spend a fair amount of our time and trying to provide advice and counsel, the first big one really is how to navigate. So you have these great entrepreneurs, right? These great guys, gals with great ideas. And they say, okay, my favorite band is Blackberry Smoke. And one of the lines is, I won't change the world, but I want to leave a scar. Right.
Mm.
And so that dent kind of thing. But there's struggle because the ecosystem is very difficult to navigate. And a lot of it is because people fall in love with their idea or their concept. And they don't have an out-of-body experience to pull themselves back and really test it and understand it how it gets consumed, who the various constituents are, how do I navigate all of that. So a lot of the work we do is really trying to help these great ideas, these great nuggets, these great point solutions about, hey, I can solve this particular health issue, I can solve this particular wellness issue, but how do I navigate that? And a lot of them have great ideas and they have that great entrepreneurial spirit. I can bend the rubber tree plant, but that can also become a real weakness if you don't really understand how to sell into it. It's all well and good that you want to leave a scar, but you got to figure out how to navigate all of that. So I would say right now, there are a lot of interesting developments taking place in and around patient engagement, in and around the concept of wellness. Obviously, evidence-based medicine, finding other holistic ways to engage people in their health, not just in their kind of medical consumption. Value-based care is a driver out there. There's a lot of energy around that, but it's fragmented. So for the executives out there, physician entrepreneurs, On the one hand, I would say it is a great time because there are other things that are taking place in the financing of healthcare and healthcare systems that allow for places to take hold outside of the traditional payer, large payer environment, particularly kind of smaller group stuff. And I think but you've got to have a solid understanding of your ecosystem, and you got to have the patience to be able to navigate through that. The last thing I would say is what I have seen is, particularly from the provider side, and it's shocking to me, having spent time in provider side, 10, 15 years ago and come back into it. Providers really don't have a good understanding of their financial drivers. They don't, and they also don't really truly understand the power of leveraging the consumer experience, as a driver of profit. So the example I would use is if you go to your average provider and they're negotiating with a payer, they're thinking in terms of some percentage of Medicare. Like, I'm going to get X percent of Medicare. I'm going to get, without any understanding of what truly their business, where do they make money in their business or lose money in their business? When they do a contract, do they truly understand what the yield of that contract is? Oh, it's a good contract because it's 100, it's 250% of Medicare. It's a bad contract because it's 150% of Medicare, without really understanding what the proper yield is. And so that, for me, and having spent time on the provider side, that those basic questions: price, mix, volume. Is your revenue going up? Is your profit going up? Is your, what's your patient engagement look like? Those fundamental questions, a lot of providers don't ask them because they're caught up in that simplistic view of reimbursement with payers. Payers are evil, and a simplistic view of, hey, I'm going to help the patient. And obviously, business is more complicated than that. So anyway, bottom line is it's still a fantastic time. There's a lot of interesting things out there, a lot of great innovation, developments in technology and data and financing, as well as rediscovering things, that were long since discarded, more holistic views of how to treat the entire patient. And it's an exciting time, but it is a complex ecosystem to navigate.
Well, our guest today is Mike Murphy. He's a managing partner at Sunstone Management Advisors. You can go to sunsstonemanagementadvisors.com. We'll put the links in the show notes, Mike's email as well. But so many things come to mind on this. I first want to talk about the metrics, or, what's the first couple of things I should do? If I'm a physician listening and I'm thinking, yeah, I don't know where I'm making money and losing money. What reports, like, how do I don't know what my office manager does. I don't know what the accountant, is looking at. I just know that I'm super busy, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, and I'm overweight, and it's not getting any better. And tomorrow looks even worse.
Yeah, I can relate. I run my own business. I'm a entrepreneur as well. You're working in the business, not on it. And it's, you're day in and day out, pushing the peanut, and you're not looking at kind of the over on top of it, and the business is kind of running you. So the first thing is, and I've done this, no matter what the business, no matter how big it is. And by the way, it doesn't matter. This is true even if you're just running a small little operation inside of something else. You need to have a good understanding of your revenue streams. So the first thing is kind of breaking things down and probably aligning things by product or product offering or service offering or some sort of bucket. It's called activity-based costing. So if you're running a patient care concierge, and a patient is a patient is a patient, and the service model is all the same, and you don't differentiate between, say, frequent flyers, somebody that comes in to see you, every day, versus somebody that only comes to see you every 6 months or doesn't come in at all, you're missing an opportunity to truly better understand your business. So the first thing is having the discipline of kind of codifying and breaking your business down into smaller parts. Now, you can't break it down so small that the volume makes no sense. Like, so you create unicorns. That's no good. You want to break your business down into smaller chunks that have a discernible kind of revenue and expense flow attached to them. Even if your model doesn't have a gold, silver, platinum kind of product portfolio, I mean, that's ideal. But if you don't even that, you got to try to segment your business and understand the differences on how your customers are coming to you. What are the revenue streams? And then you've got to go through the exercise, a bit of heuristics of trying to assign direct costs to them. Again, this sounds complicated, and it's really not at the end of the day. And you can go in and figure out, okay, if I have let's say I have three types of service offerings in my concierge. I have a gold package, a bronze, and a platinum or whatever. And each of those have different kinds of functions. I want to allocate as much business or costs to those particular products as I can. So that when I look at the business, I look at the business not just from a revenue perspective, like I get X number of dollars per patient. I look at it from a revenue minus direct expense. So this is my contribution margin. And what's interesting is that, and I've seen this over and over again, fundamental things like price, mix, volume. It's business 101. When I worked for a very large provider group, our revenue went up and down, and we could not answer, was it the price? Did the prices change? Was it the mix? Did I get more expensive services sold, less expensive sold? Or is it volume? Did I get more patients in the door? And now that's just revenue. Now translate that into profit. So the bottom line is that there is a discipline and an exercise. And you could, if you're curious enough, you can take a hack at it and kind of do it yourself, but try to break your business down into smaller chunks, ideally aligned by a product if you've got it, or some segment to look at your business. I would say this, my own experience is that a lot of times smaller companies think they're making money at something and are missing the fact that, oh, they're getting a lot of growth and the business is losing money,
Mm-hmm.
and their stuff that they're making all their money on is declining, and they're not looking at it the right way. So starts with fundamentally is having a good balanced scorecard, KPIs, break your revenue down into smaller chunks, allocate as much direct expense to that as you can, as makes sense, so that you can get a good look at what your contribution margins and your trends, and you can look at it over time. That goes along because that also tees up your operation. So let's say that you realize your bronze plan is losing money. So what do? Well, maybe I can raise my rate on my bronze plan, but maybe the real answer is I need to go into my operation and find a way to lower my costs. It just tees up all the smart conversations to get your business into equilibrium.
Yeah. That is, I think of how those conversations are going in many medical offices out there. And I'm encouraged that there are physicians wanting to lean into their numbers, lean into their KPIs, which are key performance indicators, if you're not familiar with that term. But, there's so many that are losing money, that are wasting money. And where do you see the biggest places of waste when you're working with and having these types of conversations?
I think the biggest waste, frankly, sometimes comes down to some of the marketing and soft stuff. It was a great little trick, and I would encourage everybody to do this. Truly understand value, really understand what your consumer values and doesn't value. And value means what they'll pay for, not what they think is cool, right? And so what they think is cool doesn't matter. Will they pay for it? So we used to, and I've done this everywhere I've gone, little placard, and it says, do you know what your customer would say about this?
Yes. Oh,
everybody, whether it's the front desk or it's, it's admin staff or the physician or the CEO, do you know what your customer would say about this? And it's a double-edged sword, because the first one says, do you know? And a lot of them don't. They're remarkably tenured, don't really understand what their customer would say. And then the second thing is, what you're doing right now, how is that moving the needle and bringing value to your consumer? So I see a lot of waste in things that, particularly some of the, marketing stuff. Well, boy, this is really cool. And, they fall in love with the stuff and they don't ask themselves the really hard question. What would my customers say about this? Would they be willing to pay for this? If I could say to them, hey, I'm going to charge you for this, would they pay for it? So that's a part of it. The other thing is rework, leaks and sources of, your workflows, just the front of office to back. How have you put a stopwatch on that? Have you looked at what that process is like? Because sometimes it's inefficient and you got multiple touches and there's leaks and things get held up, but also some of those touches result in a less than desirable customer experience, which is going to kill you every time. And so, yeah, I'd say that the two things that jump in mind is wasted stuff on things that the owner or some, buddy thinks is really cool, but aren't really in touch with what consumers really need or want. And then just inefficient workflows and failure to have proper controls and just an execution of what your business model is are the places where we see waste.
And our guest today is Mike Murphy. He's a managing partner at Sunstone Management Advisors. And we'll put the links in the show notes on how to connect with Mike. And we're going to talk, our next focus area is going to be on what Sunstone Management Advisors does, how you can help. But before I jump onto that, I want to touch on the marketing aspect, because there is a tendency for so many physicians, especially ones who, are in the trenches of seeing and treating patients every single day, that maybe don't have a real good beat of their KPIs, don't have a good beat of their numbers. That they tend to fall into this, you could call it a business disease, insideritis. I think Carey Nieuwhof or other people have
Right.
coined that phrase over the years, but you've got insideritis. It has, I would say, infected your business or your practice when you hear things from your staff like, well, or you at meetings and staff meetings or board meetings, you hear things like, well, that's not how we do it, or, that's a really good idea, but we don't have time for that. And when you have that type of mentality, you are going to impact the customer experience, or you're going to impact the patient experience. And primary care, we talked about this off air, but primary care is losing market share. And what do businesses do when they lose market share? That's my question for you. I'll let you briefly touch on that.
Sure.
I mean, healthcare doesn't get a pass just because it's treating the human condition.
Right.
And just because they have payer relationships that drive patients in the local community to your practice, so you don't have to do any marketing. My background is in marketing and public relations. And so I see that if you're going to work on your marketing, sending out a Thanksgiving card or a birthday card that everybody signed their first name and you think it's all cute and great, and that's so personal. That's not personal at all. Like, that's a waste of your marketing dollars.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
what do businesses do when they lose market share? And maybe what is healthcare? What can doctors do?
Sure. So let me tell you what businesses do as a matter of course, but is a disaster. So the first thing that happens when you start to lose market share is your revenue drops. First thing they do is they run around and cut expenses. It's like, so you run back in and then there's a willy-nilly headcount fire. I mean, again, I lived inside the big organizations forever. And if revenue's off, the first thing is we got to do layoffs, and so it's start throwing nickels around like manhole covers, looking for change in the cushions, let people go, put X's on desks, really kind of dark stuff. And as opposed to really pulling themselves back and again, ask the question, why is revenue is falling off? What's going on? Now there's another adage here too, which is a great line. And I love this. I think it's David Packard who once said that nothing kills a bad product faster than good marketing. Right. So the first thing is that, and then the other thing I would say is, which is a challenge to anybody out there, it was a quaint idea that you contracted with payers to deliver you volume, right? So that you don't have to do marketing. I would challenge any provider group out there that day's gone, because the networks are not selective really anymore, right? To a large extent, everybody's in everything. And so that whole promise, and again, I was one of them. I would go in and have a conversation with a provider and say, I'm going to deliver you X number of patients. If you're not in my network, it's going to your competition. And in exchange for that, it's like a sales discount. You agree to take a discount for it. Well, it's kind kind of a joke now, because at the end of the day, go look at a lot of these networks and, they're not particularly exclusive. So it's, I mean, there are some certainly circumstances out there with networks within networks and some of the Medicare, perhaps Medicaid stuff where there you can get some volume, but your average, physician group, concierge medicine group, you're not getting volume. What you're getting is financing. You're getting somebody coming to you that has some level of coverage to kind of pay for the bill. That's the attraction. So, and some will say, hey, I'd rather have a cash and carry business, be more like a dentist's office where 60-70% of my receivable is out of pocket, but at least I'm not dealing with payer rules and all that other stuff. So, understanding that the relationship with the payer is more a financing arm than it is a marketing arm. Now, having said all that, you're a small business, you have to compete. You have to compete not just against, the other kind of similar constituted concierge type, hospitality type medical models, but everybody, the big Jagunda Kaiser, right? Or the large integrated multi-specialty practice group. That's your competition. Your friends, your doc friends are your competition. How are you bigger, faster, better, cheaper? And some of that's just, and again, it's fundamentals on some business things. One, what's your value proposition? And what is, and your business definition. What business are you truly in? And don't say you're in the business of providing care. That's not really that's not a business definition. What problems are you serving to solve? That's your value proposition. And the other big one is your proprietary distinction. How are you bigger, faster, better, cheaper than the competition from the consumer perspective? When that consumer hits your front door, what about that interaction and that engagement and them being part of your business says, this is where I want to be? And they become a reference for you, right? It's a referenceable experience. Every patient through the door, every interaction has a potential to be a reference. And so that takes a cultural change. It takes a fundamental mindset change, but that's how you have to compete. Consumers with Yelp and things like this. I mean, it's not, healthcare is not able to skate around it. And healthcare does not have a particularly good reputation for being particularly consumer friendly. So the first thing I would say is that, if your revenue is going down or whatever, go back to that price mix volume conversation I had right now, because your revenue might go down. That might be okay because you might be losing business that you don't want anyways, and that's fine. But understand where your streams are coming from. And then ask yourself the tough question. What am I doing to attract share? How am I bigger, faster, better, cheaper? Once you understand that, then you can start to put in some proactive marketing programs. And you're right. Don't be trite and simple and send out, pre-programmed Thanksgiving cards or any of this stuff. Ask yourself, what is the consumer going to send value in? And nothing spreads faster word of mouth. And so this is old data here, but like if somebody has a bad experience, the chain of that will grow 10, 12, 13, 14, 20 times, right?
Mm-hmm.
If somebody has a good experience, it's 2 to 3. Mm-hmm. You can't have any bad experiences, and you got to make sure every patient through the door is a referenceable client. What is their interaction? How does it go? And some of the stuff is just a mindset. Like I remember there was a groundbreaking study done years ago by Kaiser, where patients were complaining that they thought the nurse practitioners were way too busy, didn't have time. And then they were looking and said, well, no, the nurse practitioners are doing all right. And the question is, so they said, well, what if we stop at the end of every single service interaction, the nurse practitioner or the physician assistant puts down the clipboard and said, what else? Is there anything else I can help you with today?
Yeah.
That's all they asked.
Personal.
Boom, big increase, like, oh, it's a great experience. Little something simple. So there's a lot of that goes on, and that's the mindset. That's the kind of that strategic intent that's everybody from the front office to the back understands it, and it's in your business. But remember, you're not going to solve your revenue problems with fancy marketing. You've got to execute on your business fundamentals.
But let me add to that. There's a misunderstanding that, okay, that means I should just cut all my marketing costs, right? And I think I recommend the book for any physician or anyone out there related to, it's called Excellence Wins. It's by Horst Schulze. worked with the Ritz-Carlton. If you've ever been to a Ritz-Carlton, you probably have a memory, right?
Yep.
Something, multiple things pop into your mind of like, wow, that's how you do it. And I wrote a story recently about how could concierge medicine, for example, be put out of business. And it's a little bit of an ironic story to write, but it's okay. Well, then provide excellent customer service, answer all my questions, be super responsive, have a great patient experience, the paint color, the chairs, everything. All this stuff will never happen, right? It's healthcare. It's too big. There's too many things happening. There's not enough resources. There's not enough time. I was waiting with my daughter for one of her appointments, and we were in an empty waiting room, and we waited probably over 40 minutes in an empty waiting room, right? First appointment of the morning. And what I learned about my daughter in that time was, she loved movie trilogies, and she would bring me up to speed on what I was, some of the outdated phrases that you don't use anymore. And one of the quotes that came to mind from the trilogy was from The Lord of the Rings, and it said, "You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to." And that is so true of being a patient today,
Yep.
in today's healthcare hectic environment. And it's, the Goodwill Hunting idea of where Robin Williams inches his way closer to Matt Damon and says, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault." Well, that is true, that it might not be your fault, but we bump into, as patients, your staff. Did they smile at us? We're measuring those interactions. We're measuring how difficult it was to find your location. Did I have to go 3 floors up and there was a little tiny sign in the lobby telling me where you were? I'll conclude my thought with this is from Kerry Newhoff. He said, "Too many leaders, once they have a system in place, fly on autopilot directly into a mountain they missed because they weren't paying attention. Theoretically, the system was." All right. So our next, my next topic or kind of question is related to. This is kind of a big picture topic, but there seems to be in healthcare this adversarial relationship between payer and insurance company and physician. Shed a little bit of light on that from your
Sure.
background and experience. How do you overcome and how do you have that conversation over dinner with doctors because, we need, unfortunately or fortunately, doctors need some of those payer relationships.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're grateful as patients. I mean, I've seen the $50,000 EOPs and things
Mhm.
that come in for your kids' stuff or your own surgeries, and you're like, "Whew, I'm sure glad I got insurance," But at the same time, he or she is dealing with it on the reimbursement side and the contracting side, and it's like, "Well, I got pre-authorizations." How those are so you're like, ah. So, what's that conversation for you look like when that pops up?
Yeah, fascinating. It's difficult, and part of that is it's it's kind of like the battle between labor and management, and it's playing out in the public arena, and there's a battle for control. And so a lot of the things that you see, the sword fighting going on between payers and providers and the animosity is just part of a bigger battle of this gigantic drive for control. Payers are the financing side, of the healthcare system. They organize, control the financing side. So they're in between the provider, or no way around it, and the financing and reimbursement. And so there is naturally going to be, animosity and some of it just for effect, right? We've got to influence public policy. So the latest thing that's out there is you're seeing a lot of things around uh, pre-certification and using AI for certification and all this I've said this point blank to providers. The reality is the amount of variation in the healthcare system today versus the literature and what's available out there is unconscionable. And the reality is that there's a dramatic amount of completely unnecessary care that's taking place. It's a waste on the system. Now, some of that is driven by defensive medicine and tort reform. Like I've got to do an MRI or CPT because if I don't, failure to diagnose is a disaster for a physician. So yeah, if it's going to cost $3,000 to do it, do it. It's not worth getting a $300,000 lawsuit. Some of it is just regional practices of care and how you were trained, irrespective of what the literature says. So both sides have a role to play here. And the only other thing I would say is, in this regard, is that if you look at, particularly say outside of Medicare for the time being and Medicaid, 60-70% of the lives that are in payer are self-insured. So when the payer says we're not authorizing this particular procedure, it's not going into their pocket. It's going into the employer's pocket. And so a lot of providers don't necessarily understand that, there's the profit motive, which people rail about in healthcare, necessarily apply necessarily in normal commercial medicine. So the animosity is there. I look at it as somewhat a byproduct of the battle in the streets influencing public policy. But there's a role to play here. And the reality is that for all the good stuff that physicians and providers do, there's a lot of bad stuff they do. There's a lot of overprescription of prescription meds. There's a lot of complete unnecessary, care being rendered that does not result in better care for the patient. So the payer has a role to play on all that. Now, the other side of it is, the payer creates hassles. They're bureaucratic. I mean, I'll tell you one example. It blew my mind. There's the old notion of the gatekeeper, right? You have to go to your primary care physician before you can go to the specialist. I am running a health plan. All of our 70-80% of our complaints are because of the referral system, where the person went to a specialist, the primary care forgot to submit the form, or the form got lost, or we didn't enter it. And then we looked at it some more and found out that virtually 99% of the time we overruled ourselves. So we were just creating all this unnecessary hassle for everybody in the system. So we said, well, what would we do if we were really paying attention? Would we do anything? The answer is no. So I said, well, let's leave the rule in place, but not enforce it, right? And so we left the rule in place, and then we tricked the system. Our complaints went away, and our medical costs didn't change a bit. So there are plenty of examples where payers are doing, and by the way, where did that rule come from? That rule came from 40 years ago. Kaiser, because it was a staff model, did not want people leaving their building. And so they put a rule in place so they didn't go see specialists outside. I had a network model who mattered. So there are plenty of blame to go around. I will tell you, having been on the payer side forever, I never once, ever saw a non-clinician make any sort of clinical determinations. Everything medical management, in fact, physicians that I work with would have stormed out of the building if that had taken place. So the decisions that were made around medical and medical management were all based on literature, proper outcomes, quality, that sort of thing. So I'm not saying that's universal. There are bad players out there. So they're not going away anytime soon, but they'll continue to fight each other, in the market and in the press, and build this kind of animosity. But I would say this to physicians, is to understand their role and understand big picture, how much waste and unnecessary care there is in the system. And the payer's role primarily, might be a necessary evil, but they're bringing financed, cash support business to you. And yes, they may have pre-certification requirements, things like that. A lot of those pre-certification requirements are based on sound principle. I'll tell you one final story. We took a medical management model that was a little more aggressive, so more pre-certification, more managing the patient every single day, whether they were in network or in the hospital. And we dropped that into a looser form of a PPO, call it what you will. And year over year, the medical cost reductions were 10%. So we took a lot of unnecessary costs out of the system. there are a lot of unnecessary costs out of the system. Some physicians, are saying, let me do that. I'm going to do a global capitation. I'm going to do that. And those models are particularly aggressive. Physicians managing physicians are as aggressive cost managers as anything you're going to say. So, bottom line is the animosity is there. It's going to be there. Some of it's for battle for public policy and laws and regulations. I haven't been on both sides of it. I get it's not going away anytime soon. But I think smart entrepreneurs on both sides will figure out a way to navigate it to the betterment of each other.
Well, thank you for clarifying that and kind of peeking behind the veil. I don't remember the Wizard of Oz peeking behind the curtain. I'm not
Yeah.
really. I don't remember. I haven't seen that movie in a long time. But I was explaining last night while I was with my taking the dog for a walk with my daughter. She kind of had asked the question like, "Why are these silly rules at work?" Like, I was like, "Well, because somebody messed up and ruined it for everybody else. And so they created a rule. And the same thing happens in legislative, and the same thing happens in insurance, and the same thing happens in healthcare. One guy or gal messed it up for everybody else.
Everybody else. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah. And she's like, it's so silly. I was like, well, you're a cashier at a grocery store. Somebody back in the day, checked out $300 worth of groceries for their dad and ruined it for everybody else. So now you can't check out your mom and dad or your brother or sister or family members when they arrive at the store. But nonetheless, I think that there's a tendency in healthcare to think that twofold. And I want you to speak to this because it's more of a commentary on the healthcare ecosystem. And then we'll talk about the future after that. But the commentary is as a clinician, when I look at, I'm not a clinician, but speaking metaphorically, when I look at the business of healthcare, I don't want business people to get involved. So that's part one.
Yep.
The part two is I also think that everybody at a payer is wrenching every single day like a mechanic to try and make my life harder and worse.
Yep.
And I think that there's probably good people that work at those organizations because they're large, right? And so, speak to that to
Sure.
just kind of shed some light and maybe give some encouragement to the healthcare folks listening.
Yeah, so I don't know how encouraging I'm going to be, but I don't think it's dark, right? So, but I don't know how encouraging I'm going to be. But let me start with the fundamental. And again, I ran health plans. I hired doctors. I hired nurses. We reviewed medical cost management. I sat as a guest in the committees as we did quality management reviews, adverse outcomes. We reviewed bad scenarios. We did credentialing and, all that. So I saw all of that taking place, the kind of corporate medicine model, if you will. But there was never, I'm a history major, right? So there was never any moral hazard. I was never anywhere near, and even anything the corporate folks did, never anywhere near clinical determinations of business side of it. Just wasn't there. The procedures, the guidelines, everything else. And again, the way we were running at the time was a lot of us using committees made up of physicians in the community to have fundamental, smart types of medical procedures. So there's a lot of noise out there with regard to bureaucrats and pre-certification, all this other stuff. It kind of makes the hair on my back and the neck stand up because there's a lot of unnecessary care. And that's what the payers' role are. In fact, the payers, frankly, aren't doing enough of it, right? Remember, big chunk of their business is self-insured, and there's a whole roiling ecosystem now, kind of down market, smaller employers saying, I'm not getting the cost reductions. Costs are still a huge issue. And Buchan isn't necessarily tearing the cover off the ball in terms of taking costs out of the systems. So, which leads me to my second point, and that they are big and unresponsive. So it's less that it's and they're all about efficiency, right? So if you're a concierge medicine practice and you're trying to do something that makes sense on behalf of the patient and all that, you might not get much of an audience because that's inside of this gigantic organization where they want everything hardwired and efficient. So if you want to come in and do something a little bit different, very, very difficult to get it done. It's not necessarily that they're, being evil. It's just that, I want one fee schedule to cover an entire metropolitan service area. So I don't want to have 1,000 different fee schedules because I've got all these great little entrepreneur concierge medical device companies out there doing cool stuff. And so I'm doing these creative things. I don't want that. No. I want simple because I got to hold my costs down, right? I gotta keep my administrative costs low. And so that's a big driver of this. So it's the bureaucracy, and so that part of it's a little dark. And so, and that's where you start making your determinations like, well, how much of my business do I want where I'm kind of stuck with these procedures that are hoisted on me that I can't do a lot about just because of the size of the bureaucracy? Or are there some other places that I can diversify and do some more creative things with some more creative providers? Or I just limit a chunk of my business. So I'm going to have X number. I got to have Blue Cross. I got to have United. I got to have Aetna, but that's it. And then the rest of my business is going to be maybe a little bit more cash and carry, or maybe a little bit more with service providers that are going to be a little bit more attentive to my needs. So summarizing, I don't think the payers are evil and at all. And then again, my experience, I never once saw it. Doesn't mean it doesn't take place. I'm not saying anybody's an angel, but they are extraordinarily difficult to deal with just because of the sheer size. And if you're a smaller player, just don't care. Just don't care.
Well, our guest today is Mike Murphy, and Mike is a growth leader. He's helping so many folks understand healthcare, insurance, transform their business, focus on growth, craft some strategies to, understand where you can direct your energy to be more successful. Because, I've said this before on previous podcasts and other places is we need more. We can't afford to have our doctors go out of business anymore. Like, yeah, you're losing market share. The trust is eroding. Patient burnout is getting worse. In fact, even the science or the data backs that up, or even recently. We are moving into our lightning round of questions, so you can be however brief or long-winded as you would like to on this. But for those kind of looking for, I try to recap some of the last few minutes. I think this is a great quote from Maya Angelou that kind of talks real well about what we're talking about today, and that is make every effort to change things you do not like. If you cannot make a change the way you have been thinking, you might find a new solution. And you talked a little bit about mindset, and so thank you for covering that earlier. Our first question for you, and you're welcome to go off on that as well, but our first question would be, where would you guide healthcare, people who work in healthcare, people who are clinicians, where would you guide them to learn to be better people at business? And that might be to talk to folks like you. You're not paying for this conversation. I'm not paying you. We think that this is just informative information that physicians who are listening and folks who are working in healthcare need to know about folks like you at Suncoast. And talk to us about, where would you tell doctors to go if you're having dinner with them tonight?
Yeah, great question. And while I wasn't a clinician, I'm a history major, right? So how did I go from being a history major to, I started as an underwriter and got into the whole financing side and do all the things that I did. And it's frankly, it starts with a mindset, just to be curious, be a voracious reader. I found inspiration in, first of all, Harvard Business Review, subscribe and read, and not everything, but and even as somebody that, even I was just managing a department, inside the big company, you got inspiration because you started listening to what some of the great case studies are and the great ideas, and it just got your juices flowing. In fact, the problem is you fall behind during the year, and this is before, a long time ago, before, it was easy to kind of save things electronically. And invariably I'd go on vacation and I'd have a mound of articles that I had clipped that I wanted to go back and read. So I'd say the first thing is start with a mindset, subscribe to the Harvard Business Review. There's a couple of books out there. Some of the great business books are out there, Good to Great, some of the other things, Search of Excellence, that sort of thing. It just gets your mindset going. The other thing that I did is that I didn't know anything. So accounting for dummies, you got to learn accounting, right? So just have to understand accrual accounting and so balance sheets and income statements and KPIs, it just become a voracious reader, become a student. You can self-teach us things like that. And I would start with HBR and just be a religious, consumer of that. And that mindset, you'll learn, and that mindset will also inform you. You'll get great ideas. You'll drive your staff nuts because you'll come back from vacation having read 3 different HBR articles and we're missing something on consumer engagement. I got a great idea. But that's the energy that drives your practice. That's what drives innovation. So be a student, number one, and read. Carve time and read and business related stuff. You'll figure it out.
When there's that tendency, that conference momentum where the
right.
teacher went to a conference and he's like, okay, here's the game plan on Monday morning with their staff. And then the staff's like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yep.
You don't even know what happened on Thursday. Like we got to deal with this first. And so there is that tendency. And so often in healthcare, you hear I don't want a non-clinician telling me how to practice medicine. And so I back, in talking with so many doctors over the years, we look at, okay, the process or the navigational journey that a patient goes through is care, serve, treat, repeat. That's kind of how I've outlined it.
Yep.
But caring and serving are very different definitions to a patient than they are to an office manager and especially to a clinician. The treatment aspect, what happens in the exam room is the sacred, don't touch that. That's where the physician thrives. But the caring, like when I walked in, like, are you in a location that is really hard to park, or did your staff smile at me, or did they just feed me a clipboard with the forms that I've pretty sure I completed the last time? And y'all never seem to put these in the computer, right? Or, am I going to be asked to do something embarrassing today in the office during my visit? Or I got to pick up the kids, from school or from the daycare, or else literally I heard this from a patient the other day who had the doctor, and the doctor said she was going to be charged $1 a minute for every minute she was late. And it's not fair of us, to make patients go through this experience. So we've got to innovate. And with that in mind, I think that Al Ries said the next generation product and ideas almost never comes from the previous generation. And when you look towards the future based on your experience of the past and your historical perspective as well, what are you excited about related to the future of healthcare delivery, whether that's in independent practice, whether that's in payer relationships? Where are you seeing that healthcare is going to be different in the next 10 years, 20 years for our kids?
Yeah. So we're at a bit of a tipping point because the consumer has yet to really impact healthcare. I mean, it's out there. Consumerism in healthcare is talked about it. It's nibbling around the edges and it's starting to get out there. And I see that trend continuing. And that will create opportunities because, it used to be, and I remember I talked to physician executives and there was the physician as God mindset, right? I remember somebody saying, do I need or do I not need, an MRI? Well, I'm Dr. Joe. I've got the white jacket on. I got the stethoscope. I say you need it. I'm God. You get it. And that's turning around. There's more and more, information, more and more things that, fingertips out there. And so that tradition, physician as God, all-knowing, almighty Favog knows everything is certainly under siege to some degree from the consumer. And I don't, and the physician community will react to that, and it, and has started to react to it. But obviously you've got more empowered consumers who come in and say, don't give me that crap, doc. You're wanting me to death. Tell me what the literature says. Why should I get a knee replacement? And don't tell me it's because you think so. Right. So there's that challenge that's taking place. And I think that
Show me the evidence.
Show me the evidence. And by the way, and I remember this vividly. This was like fall out of my chair one day. I was at a conference and a doc gets up on stage and he's right out of the LL Bean catalog. He's got the arm patches. He's got a little bit of a hippie. He's got a younger guy's beard, longer hair, Birkenstocks, the whole bit. And it was a conference that, I was, executive, and I go, who brought this guy in? Right. And so he folds his coat and he puts it on the stage and then he starts to talk and my jaw went. And it was really about the fact that, medical literature in the country had been hijacked. That, there were all these studies and things like that out there. And again, I have no problem with pharmaceutical companies funding that stuff, but a lot of the literature was hijacked. And this was a doctor who was doing his homework. He was a family practice doc in the Berkshires. So it was OBGYN, pediatrics, internal medicine. He was reading an article on the use of statins. He looked at the corresponding literature, the supposing supporting documentation, and it wasn't there. And he pulled a string on it and got roadblocked. And he went on this whole soliloquy about literature and evidence-based medicine and all that. So anybody, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there was no way, if you were an average, jabroni, there's no way you get your hands on it. Today, I'm having knee problems. Okay, my knees are bugging me, right? I can go on and get literature. I can look at it, and now I have something to engage the doctor on. So those are all of that certainly is huge opportunity for caregivers and providers. The one that engages the consumer either helps educate them or is really doing the work for them and really understands the outcomes in the literature and has that level of credibility, I think, is going to be a winning score. So, and there's no shortage right now of innovation. And some of that innovation is going back in time and looking at more traditional forms of holistic medicine, traditionally ignored through the Western medicine idea, and marrying the two things together. I think the best of both worlds, treat the whole patient, treat the whole idea that, that the dis-ease is not just, think about the placebo. It's right in front of us. What's the placebo? The placebo is somebody thought they were doing something to make him better, and it made him better. Wow. Right. So I don't know. I'm excited about where healthcare is going. I know it's going to be a lot of tumult. I'd love to see more transparency, certainly in some of the literature and outcomes. But and I do think that the other thing that'll happen for physicians is a matter of course, there'll be other models out there. Does the MD truly need to be in there with, the kid with the runny nose? That's our expectation. That's probably not a fair expectation. There are plenty of things that you can do through physician's assistants and nurse practitioners where the care is actually going to be better and they can stay longer because you're not worried about the doctor at his billable hour spending an extra 2 minutes with the patient saying, so how are things otherwise, right? But if you're doing that in your economic model with a nurse practitioner at a lower cost, the economics will work and the care is going to be better.
Well, and I think for anybody who is listening and kind of bumps into the idea of what you just said, I'm not a physician, but I am a patient. And so I know what it's like to sit on the other side of the exam room from you or your sliding service window. And, Don Draper from the series Mad Men, we all remember him. We have a visual from him. He said a quote, "People want to be told what to do so badly they'll listen to anyone." And from a patient perspective, Don Draper was right? Like I will go where I feel cared for, I feel served, I feel, that I'm getting my needs met. And then if I got my needs met last week and it was easier to go there over to this facility and it was quicker and you're telling me I have to go over here first and get referrals and all this other stuff, then, we as consumers are going to go to the path of least resistance, like water, in a waterfall. So there's so much there that we can bump into, and we will resist innovation. We will resist, new ideas. But I'm excited about, how it is becoming more consumer focused.
Yep.
We can download an app, and I think that it was a physician we interviewed not too long ago, becoming physicians seeing themselves more as data scientists and being better business people by managing other clinicians of different specialties. That's going to maybe be the role of clinicians in the near future. But yet, there's another doctor, he said, we're our worst enemies, too. We're the ones that get in the way a lot of times too, by holding on to what we hold sacred so tight. And we're always of the persuasion that, hey, if you can marry the Hippocratic Oath to the golden rule, you're never going to go wrong. Our last question is, well, second to last question. Our guest today is Mike Murphy. Thank you for being with us today. He's with Sunstone Management Advisors. He's a managing partner at Sunstone Management Advisors. And our second to last question is the last thank you note you received or you sent. Doesn't have to go into the weeds, but we're big on the attitude of gratitude in healthcare. I believe that, I think it was True Kathy once said, the universal sign that somebody needs encouragement is if they are still breathing. And I think that we can really turn around healthcare, especially the physician burnout, the clinician burnout, the nurse burnout, if we just started showing some gratitude to folks. I was at Walmart, just yesterday, and in the morning shopping for, I think it was a coffee maker. And, I was listening to the pharmacist phone calls there, and they're doing great work, but some people are just not being very kind to them
They're
either.
grumpy.
So I went over and I said, hey, I just want to say thank you for what you do. You don't know me from Adam. I'm not here to get anything. I just wanted to say I appreciate you. So the last thank you note you might have received.
Received.
Or
Yeah,
sent.
interesting. Sent. Yeah, I send them all the time. I mean, it's common courtesy. Like, so for example, I mean, we talked about marketing before. A lot of marketing is asking for time. Like, can I have your time? And if they take the time to respond to say no, I still thank them because they took the time to respond. I'm hypersensitive to just being polite. And if they, and then legit, not, syrupy, phony Hallmark stuff, like legit, thank you. I reached out to you. You didn't know who I was. I introduced my firm to you. I think I can help you. I'm trying not to waste your time. Would you want to spend some time with me? And the answer is, well, it's not really a fit for me. I am absolutely thankful that they took the time to respond to me, and it's not phony, and it's like, thank you. So it's, yeah, I wish, Brian Regan is a comedian, he had a great idea for how to improve civility in society. And he just said, he said, this was his idea, that everybody gets to kill somebody without exception, and you get out of, he said, you watch how polite everybody is. Hey, good to see you. I want to, everybody's going to be really nice because you don't know that one grumpy Lou is going to pull that. Like, it's really dark, but it's true. I mean, it's just basic, be polite, be pleasant. We're all human beings, right? And you don't know what kind of day that person's having. If you're asking them for some time, express some gratitude, have some joy. If you're smiling at somebody, just smiling back at them, like, it's going to help them, right? Why don't you think about others, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's especially true in healthcare. There's nothing worse walking into a provider office and having some surly person behind the desk not even look up, look down, and go, yeah. It's like, yeah. Look up and smile.
Do you have an appointment? What's your name?
Yeah. Give me your insurance card. Put your mask on. All right.
No.
Yeah, it's,
and
life's too short. Smile.
And then what I find is in so many of the hamster wheel type of practices that the doctor doesn't necessarily even know that that stuff is happening, right? Like the holy grail of the visit is the time spent with the physician or the clinician,
Right.
the specialist. But you know, in staff meetings, it's, well, I've got too much to do, and if you're gonna send me to a customer service conference, you know, or training or a webinar, then you know, I just don't have time for that. And those are good ideas, you know, physician CEO who's running the practice and paying my paycheck, but I don't have time for that. And then it's, you know, cast off as, well, that's a good idea, but I don't have time for that. But, and then we wonder why, you know, the physician shortage is, and why primary care physicians and family docs are saying to their kids, you know, I don't think my kids, I'm encouraging them not to do this. Like, go into a specialty, you know, like you're going to be treated better and more, it's more friendly and pays better. But we've got to have these difficult conversations related to hospitality and healthcare. Our final question for you is, if you were to hang up your spurs, hand in the keys to your role, to your career, you know, what's one story of many that comes to mind that you're just like, you know what, this is why I work in healthcare. This is why I do what I do. What's one story that comes to mind for you? And then we'll wrap it up.
Sure. Yeah, it's been I had to hire my first doctor. I had a small health plan. I had to hire a medical director, and I hired him. We became fast friends and colleagues, and learned from each other. Obviously, I wasn't a clinician, and he was Harvard trained. I mean, was as good a soul as you're gonna meet. And I never forget. We took him to his first sales presentation. You never know how they're going to go, right? This is like, okay, I'm going to take and the docs are key, you know, on the payer side to the sales presentation. They don't want to hear from the gas bag insurance executive. You know, they want to talk to Dr. Welby. Tell me how my employees are going to be okay under your system. And we were in somewhat of a friendly place where the client was an existing client and was contemplating moving into more of a managed care environment. And we were introducing the doctor for the first time. And she said, okay, I know Mike and I know Dan and Dr. Mark, you know, you have a very impressive background. Tell me why, you know, you went to work, in this case was Cigna Healthcare. And Dr. Mark said, I come from a long history of physicians. My father was a doctor. My father's father was a doctor. My father's father was a doctor. I knew from the time I was a young lad, I was going to be a doctor and a physician. And as I grew up in it and got to see it, I became overwhelmed with the incredible things that was able to be done in the American healthcare system, but incredibly motivated by just how much better it could be. And when I set to go my practice, I said I was going to devote my practice to being part of making this thing as incredible as it could be, addressing some of the things that are wrong in it. And then he went on to say that the reason he had gone to Cigna was because that gave him the best chance to do that. But that little vignette from this physician, you know, kind of, and again, I didn't have his background in his update, and I thought, that's it. This was a deeply ethical, moral, caregiving, you know, doctor that saw how great the system is, and it does some remarkable things, but just how much better it could be. And I've always carried that as an inspiration for me. I tell the story all the time, and hope all the physicians out there, that's what they're thinking too. Like, it's, you know, we can spend a lot of time moaning and groaning and payers and Medicare and you know, and pain in the neck patients and, you know, all that stuff, and the staff's no good and I can't, you know, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they're still doing some pretty remarkable things, but it still can be a lot better. And if we're constantly chasing that, making it a lot better one at a time, I mean, that's a pretty remarkable thing. So that, I kind of carry that around with me. That's kind of my favorite little vignette and inspiration for me that keeps me going all these years.
Wow. It gives me goosebumps. And
Yeah, good, isn't it?
yeah, that's a great story. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Sure.
Well, our guest today has been Mike Murphy. He's a managing partner at Sunstone Management Advisors. We'll put the links of how to connect with Mike in the show notes above or below. This has been a real pleasure to speak with you and hear, your expertise, hear what you're doing. How and why, what do you want doctors now to do with what they've heard? What do you want health advisors to do? They're working in healthcare. What's
Sure.
my next step to connect with you there at
Yeah.
Sunstone?
So if you want to connect with me, obviously, Sunstone Management Advisors.com / DPL. You can get to me and you can book some time with me. We're, I'm happy to spend time on the phone and, brain pickage. I love talking to entrepreneurs, people who are doing things. I mean, we don't necessarily put our tin cup out all the time, and sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. So I think I spend a good chunk of my week just talking to folks that are in the space saying, hey, can I run something by you? Not necessarily a commercial relationship. And just to make a connection and meet and talk to folks, I'm happy to do that all day long. And if it makes sense for us to kind of figure out a way to how we might be able to help you, certainly. I mean, we have very creative ways to engage economically to, as a yes if instead of no because kind of thing. We don't chase big, we're not interested in big, expensive, projects. We're singularly motivated to help our clients' businesses get better. And that might be a little bit of stuff from us as opposed to a lot, whatever makes sense. So, yeah, so sunstonemanagementadvisors.com / DPL. You can book time with me and we'll just have a meet and greet. And if there's something I can help you with, I'm happy to do it, or my colleagues, that'd be great.
Well, thank you, Mike, for being our guest today. I'm looking forward to another conversation on another day in
Yeah,
the near
this was great.
future. This has been so fun, and
Absolutely.
you've provided a lot of great expertise and insights into a world where, it can be misunderstood
Right.
and not always sunshine and roses. So, but thank you so much for what you
Likewise.
do. We say around here, if you remember anything, it's no longer about being the best doctor in the world anymore. It's about being the best doctor for the world, for your patients, and for your local community. Thank you for working in healthcare, Mike. It's nice to know that there's folks out there like you, and it gives me and my kids, my family, and my wife hope that hey, you know what? There's sun on the horizon too. So
Yeah.
thank
Well,
you for being our
congratulations to you. And, your back catalog of podcasts, I think, are mandatory listening for anybody in the healthcare space, irrespective of whether you're a physician entrepreneur or not. It's really the essence of healthcare and where it could be and where it could go. And it's about possibilities as opposed to spending a lot of time screaming at the rain. And that's what I really enjoyed about it, and really enjoyed about the conversation today. It's about how can collectively we can continue to make this system work better for all of us. And it's a great journey.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.
All righty. Take care.
We